to Hangin at the Reef. Today, we are thrilled to introduce our esteemed guest, Sabrina Thomas, the director of the HPU Library and Learning Commons. With over 20 years of experience in academic libraries, Sabrina leads and inspires a diverse team of library professionals. She's dedicated to advancing the library's mission to support academic excellence, enhance research capabilities, and build a vibrant and inclusive community. By focusing on emerging trends and technologies, Sabrina's goal is to ensure student and faculty success. In this episode, we'll also dive into the concept of the modern library and its role within the evolving information ecosystem. Sabrina will share her insights on how libraries are adapting to the digital age, integrating new technologies, and fostering a culture of continuous learning and innovation. Join us as we explore her vision and the exciting future of the library. So welcome to the show, Sabrina. It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we've talked a bit about this concept of the information ecosystem within the world of libraries and reference materials. And, I think we should start for our listeners by defining, what the information ecosystem is. What does that term mean to you?
So for my world, for our information professionals, we started to look at the whole world as an information ecosystem, one that is continuously growing, shifting, changing. And so we can't ever look at our online lives and our online resources as something that is static. Rather, we need to be prepared to pivot continuously as technology continues to change and grow, and people learn to use that technology and grow with it alongside of it. So it can be seen as our online lives. It could also be considered like a complex system of information sources, technologies, and the people who create, use, and consume it. And if it sounds messy, it is. It's just like any ecosystem around us. It is not necessarily clean. It's not a straight, narrow, it's not in a perfectly organized box. But what it does invite is creativity and a certain level of vigilance.
You called out technology, and we've seen just the pace at which things change driven by technology. How have you seen this information ecosystem shift over the past few years based on technological advances?
So if we're going to throw it way back to 2006 when I started my career, the big thing back then was Web 2.0. And what that basically means is that the internet as we knew it shifted in the sense that the web became more easily changed, updated, more user-friendly, and you could do things like you couldn't do that before. And a lot of people don't realize that fundamentally ushered in the age eventually of social media and what we know now or what we have now. In addition to that, another big shift occurred when it became mobile, smartphones. My career was there for that, and it just made everything speed up even more. And whereas if you had checked your phone now and you happen to come across misinformation or disinformation, and you're having another busy experience around you, all of that complexity adds to your susceptibility of being able to take in and verify and understand what you're reading, what you're seeing, what you're posting about. It just becomes infinitely more complex than when you're sitting down in a space in front of a computer as it used to be. And then right now, we have generative AI, which I have described as kind of throwing a bomb and everything and made everything sort of explode and reorganize and make us reassess how are we teaching? How are we learning? What does it mean to know something? I mean, we're really going back to the basics, and I like it. I'm here for it.
You called out something really important today, and that's verification or validation of information. And we know that algorithms are driving so much of the content that we consume now on social media, just online in general. And, we all, to some degree, are now living in an information bubble that's formed by our online habits, which digital marketers and social media platforms adapt their content that they serve us based on, what we're looking at, what we're viewing, and not even realizing that, a split-second scroll on a Facebook feed means something to their algorithm in terms of serving you more of that content. So, knowing that algorithms dominate so much of our online experience, can you explain how, they contribute to the creation of these information bubbles?
Absolutely. Because I think that we need to continue to return and keep returning to this conversation because there are huge implications for ethics, but also with how we move forward collectively so that the technology that we're using the technology in a beneficial way and the technology isn't using us in a detrimental way. So what is always important to remember is that algorithms selectively predict what users want to see based on what you've been looking at, what you've been clicking, what you have been searching for, everything from your Google search results to what pops up in your news feed, all of that is curated based on algorithms that like to look at and predict what you want to see. Why is that? Well, that's part of the business model, right? We don't pay a fee to use any of our social media platforms. We don't pay a fee to use Google. And that's because fundamentally we are the product. And we need to understand that we are using these products for free, but there's a trade-off. And the trade-off is surveillance capitalism. Our information is bought and sold. All right. And so that is a business in and of itself. And then also you're not getting a there's no bottom line for making more money by providing anyone with better content as far as more truthful content or higher quality content. It's about interactions. It's about getting the revenue from those interactions from ad views. So what does that all mean? You need to be aware. Everyone needs to be aware, including you and me, forever, that what we're seeing may not be the best information that's out there to make a decision, that we are often put into bubbles, ideological bubbles. And when we are in ideological bubbles, we are even more susceptible to confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is fancy for cherry picking our information to reinforce what we already believe to be true. And that's lovely. It feels nice to be affirmed in our beliefs. But what we all need to understand is that everyone is flawed. Everyone makes mistakes. And sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong. And in order to find out if I'm wrong, and I want to know if I'm wrong, I'm going to have to pierce through some of these bubbles, if you were. So yeah,
I think
that is it.
a few bubbles to be
Yes, yes.
honest with you. You bring up a couple things that I think are interesting, and I actually was talking about this last night with my marketing analytics class that I've been doing targeted data-driven marketing for about 30 years, since CRM became, a mainstream approach to housing data and using it to drive your communications. But, I would always get complaints from people about the personalization engines that an e-commerce site presents, and they know too much about me. They're presenting the things that I want. And I would stop them and say, well, wait a minute now. Why is that a bad thing? If you're going to go online and you're going to get served ads to buy products, isn't it better and a better use of your time to at least have those be relevant to you? And, I think when people think about that, they think, well, sure. But what they have issues with is the data that's driving that behind the scenes and levels of privacy and disclosure of things that they may not feel good about being out there. So putting that argument aside, for the reality that we've gone beyond that now, because the difference between using data and information that you're able to capture and maybe model against to present product recommendations or services or trips or things that you think that person might be interested in, that's great and that's one thing, but we've taken that so much further now. We've taken that idea to an extreme where now it's not just the product recommendations, but the news, the information in general that we're serving to people is so curated to affirm or to reaffirm what they believe, and the inability to see alternative perspectives is, I think, the biggest driver of the world that we live in today and this polarization that we see in every aspect of our society, from politics, to the urban-rural divide that we see. And these algorithms are driving that behavior. So, my question to you is, where do we go from here? Is there a way to pull back from this? Or are we destined to continue to live in bubbles and exacerbate the problem?
There isn't an easy answer, and it is heartbreaking. And I want to say that over what you're discussing, there's no one segment of the population that is untouched. This happens across all ideologies. Um, uh, it is, and that's because truthfully, the monetization of all of this cuts across all ideologies. Yes, fundamentally there is hope. And so what I like to tell people is individually, when you become an information literate person, so that's somebody who knows that they need to know more information, right? Need know so they know they're in an information bubble. And so know when they need information, know how to seek out that information from the best possible sources and know how to verify it. And there is a step-by-step how to that is a part of information literacy, which is a part of librarianship and has been a part of librarianship for decades upon decades, which is how to systematically evaluate the content that you're consuming. And then of course, the ethics of posting and making sure what you're posting is quality. So what are you pushing out into the world and how do you know that that is accurate? And another aspect of this I want to talk about is that there's no one who is left untouched. One of the my dearest, closest family members that I love dearly was at very, very high risk for COVID. And in the middle, right when she should have been in front of the line, the very beginning of the line, she would not get her vaccine even though her doctors were begging her to. And the reason she would not, and this is a quote that Bill Gates was going to track her through the vaccine because she was a Christian and because she was going to be rounded up and executed in a camp. And I was like, this is a logical person. This is somebody who is educated, who has a degree. So what happened? Where did this happen? How did this happen? And again, it's the information that was this fear that and the information she was consuming reinforced it. And through information literacy, I was like, where are you getting this information? Okay, who is the author? What is the evidence? Have you looked at that evidence? Does it exist? What are your doctors saying? Have you got a second opinion from a doctor? You have? What does that doctor say? And all of these things eventually she did get her vaccine, but it took a guiding through information literacy steps to get her to come back from that kind of spiral, and that could have ended very poorly,
Yeah.
as it has
So
for millions of people.
it seems like, in leading into the election, for example, there was a lot of discussion going, back a year or two now about, validation of information, the good housekeeping seal of approval on a story so that it was vetted and accurate. And there was a lot of momentum behind that, but it feels like over the last maybe, 6 or 7 months in particular, we've abandoned that and sort of accepted that there's going to be misinformation out there. Facebook, for example, their, decision to not fact check anymore. They're sort of leaving people to their own devices, and all the movements around technological solutions to validate information, to call out deep fakes, for example, seems to be less important, particularly as our incoming government tends to thrive on misinformation, propagating content on whether it's X or Truth Social. It seems like we're moving in the other direction right now.
It is very profitable. Rage baiting, for example, where you get a lot of interactions, there's that. It's highly profitable. You're going to get more people engaged, more eyeballs, and eyeballs turns a profit, right? So so there's that, and there's not the driving factor. People aren't demanding it. Another aspect that could really help is, again, federal oversight into some of this, because currently there is no federal oversight, at least not that any that I am aware of, on any across any of the information ecosystem within the United States. The UK has right to be forgotten. We do not, and no one is holding anyone accountable for any of this. And Cambridge Analytica has already happened. Congress does try occasionally to have the tech overlords come in to varying results. It
Yeah.
just their needs. Yeah. So what does this mean in a nutshell? In a nutshell, it means really the onus is on us. It's on us to become information literate. The onus is on us to teach our students to be information literate and to hold ourselves accountable, because I have shared misinformation before. I have done it. And I use it as a teaching example in my classes. How was I feeling when I shared the misinformation? What was I doing? How did I act and how did I feel when I found out the information was incorrect? And then did I immediately delete it? Or did I actually use it and say, hey, everybody in the comment section, turns out this isn't true. None of this is true. And funny thing is I teach people how to vet information for a living. So whoops. And so this is how we learn to not do this in the future. Um, yeah, that is I could tell you that story, Jeff.
Well, stories are always good for our listeners, so feel free to share if
All
you're so
right.
inclined.
This is the shortened version, but
Okay.
I was grocery shopping with all three of my tiny children at the time. So that is brutal if you have ever had the pleasure of doing that. So all of them, like three kids under 4, grocery shopping for the week. And I am getting the groceries in, and I stop to take a breather, as you do. And I checked my feed. And what is the first thing that pops up? But are you starving your son's brain? And then I quickly surfed through this article about how boys' growing brains need more nutrition and different nutrition than girls' brains. And are you, as a mom, are you feeding your son properly? Well, first I was like, oh no, I need to read this more. And I know I'll just share it, so I will come back to it. So I'll read more so I can know the list for next week, right? Because I've got a son. I need to make sure I load the groceries and I take a minute to breathe, because in that moment when I shared that, how was I feeling? Scared. Scared I wasn't being a good mom, fearful that he was getting hurt somehow, right? So that was my internal feeling. And what am I going to do to stop this? The first rule for vetting information is to check your emotions. And then the second step is to overall get an idea about your topic. Check just the basic facts. Anyway, so I relax, put the groceries away, kids go down for a nap. I open up to read the article a little bit more. And sure enough, my peers of librarians are like, hey, Sabrina, what's this? Kind of like they knew, right? They were like, have you really vetted this? And so sure enough, I look at the article and I check the author. Who's the author? Not a dietitian. Her credentials include grandma. Literally, that's her credentials, grandma. Not a dietitian. Did a quick search. No, boys do not require different dietary for their brains. You know what the worst part about this is? At the time, I was the liaison to the women's studies program. Like, it was bad. It was like, come on. So I could have, and I started to immediately delete because I was so ashamed. But then I was like, this is too good of an example. So I went into the comment section. I said, here's the author's credentials. Here's the evidence. Yeah, that's right. There's none. There is no evidence. Clearly anecdotal. I clearly messed up. This can happen to anybody. This is a blog. This is a blog, you guys, a personal blog. And how did it end up on my feed? Probably I was at the grocery store. Your location is used, what you're doing, any kind of information is picked up on who you are and what you're doing. I have no doubt that the algorithm knew I was grocery shopping, knew I had my kids with me, made those connections, put this in my timeline. That's not, again, I don't blame the tech overlords. I blame myself for making a mistake, like all humans are mistakes. But I do want to say that my peers kindly were like, hey, friend, hey.
There was an intervention, it sounds like.
It was an intervention, but it was very kind. They could have been brutal. I
Yeah.
mean, I was a teaching librarian at this point. I had, I but at this point, you could say that about any mistake. I should have known better. But so rather than delete it, I used it as an example of this is wrong. This is how I knew it was wrong. And moving forward, always check your feelings. If you're about to share something because you were very angry or very scared, that is the first indicator. It's like a red flag to stop, don't post, triangulate that information. So triangulate means you go to reputable sources and you make sure that on the basic facts they agree. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard with more, subtle stories that aren't, sort of big impact news. I mean, I think a lot of people can discern what's a true story and what's not with big stories because, if there's no other sources reporting something that's earth shattering, it's definitely not true. Otherwise, it would hit the mainstream news and you'd be hearing about it all over the place. But that leads you right back to, just the inability to trust almost any source of information, whether it's, CBS News or CNN or certainly Fox. But it makes me think about back in the day, the source of misinformation was something like the National Enquirer. So if you had been standing in that grocery line looking for some diversion, you might have glanced at that publication knowing that it was made up stories, or at least most people knew that.
You would hope, but there were still people buying it. There was because it was still being sold. So there was still, and you would hope that people were reading it for entertainment value, but at this point now, I don't know. I can say that there are ways that so there are when I say triangulate information, I will tell students to check at least 3 reputable sources, and those are sources that have a journalistic code of ethics of some kind stated explicitly and track record to adhere to that journalistic code of ethics. So there are 2 newspaper articles that you get by being an HPU faculty, student, or staff. And that's the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And if you want to set up your account and so you get access to these 2 newspapers 24/7, you can do that for free, which is a cost savings to students of several $100s. I want to say 400. Um, and you when you eat, so those are 2 you could use to to begin your triangulation. The third I always like to recommend is look to something out of the United States, like the BBC, to get an idea of what their perspective is. And when you triangulate, you're looking for where do they overlap on what's happening,
Yep.
right? And then note what they disagree on. Then you hold for 24 hours and then you do it again. And in most cases, when you triangulate again, that what they overlap on facts increases. If you're like, I don't trust the New York Times. Okay, cool. There is NPR. There's the Associated Press,
PB.
PBS.
Now, of course, a lot of people would claim that, those are liberal biased media venues. But I share your thoughts when I want to triangulate or look for what I know to be accurate information. The sources that I generally go to, because I know that they are not commercial or opinion in nature, are things like the BBC and PBS. And I know a lot of our listeners do think that, like CNN and PBS have a liberal bias, but I think that they tend to report the news and it has a bit of a liberal spin on it, not because it's being presented that way, but because, the majority of Americans are more mainstream and the views are reflected in those reports versus the extreme opinions that you see in places like Fox News or MSNBC.
Right. And don't forget, there's also news analysis and straight news. News analysis is where you have talking heads or your pundits, right? And they will be discussing the news. And that's when you'll often see a lot of that. Well, that's slanted clearly. But if you're looking at just the straight news, you'll see less. However, what I do in classes is I will call him Patrick, Kaepernick. I would take articles about his protest into the classroom from CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. And I would lay same day, same time, same topic. And I would lay it next to each other and I would have students highlight and look at the connotations of the words. What was reported first in the article? What was reported last? Where do they overlap in the facts? And how do they give preferential treatment to certain aspects of the story? So yeah, the fact that that's when I learned I had no idea that this protest was born out of an act of faith. I had no idea his devout faith is what led to the that and that again, it because it depends on what is included and where in the story it's but you'll notice that when I said to triangulate information, I didn't mention CNN, I didn't mention Fox News, or MSNBC. If you are going to watch or consume any of that, know that those are 24/7 and know that you're going to need to absolutely triangulate. But oh, well, but let's be honest, even that's I have to even update that now. You are going to have to triangulate everything. And fact checkers like myself, librarians are fact checkers by the virtue of the profession. I don't stop at 3. Most of the time I'm going 4, 5. And if it's an extreme story with a lot of controversy, I'll go as much as 8. Um, yeah, that takes a lot of time and energy. And
Yeah.
it's just hard. So it's really but I will say this, when you start looking and fact checking, I tend to only do it on things that are like again, create an emotion and which ones that are just so outlandish I have to check.
Yeah. Well, we got to, face the reality that, so much of, what we think of as news, it's entertainment and opinion, and it's its own information bubble, and it's perpetuating a lot of the misinformation that's out there. But that's by design, and it's really rooted in, to your point earlier, it's about making money. It's about, I struggled for a long time with recognizing the reality of the society, the culture that we live in here in the United States has unbridled capitalist society. And that's in many ways a wonderful thing and what makes us different. But there's also a downside to that. Everything is about profit motive. Everything is about, a business venture that can create wealth or profitabilities. That's the society that we live in here. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but you have to recognize that, because that very drive is what leads to posturing, we might call it, or positioning, or things that aren't necessarily completely true. They might have a thread of truth in it, but things get spun. And then you take that to an extreme, like what we've seen in our politics, where we now have alternative facts, and we have folks that feel they can get up and literally say anything in the moment, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. And our society seems to have accepted that as the new norm.
That's why we need librarians and libraries
Well put.
and information literacy. And
Intellectual curiosity.
absolutely intellectual curiosity and to protect intellectual freedom to seek out those answers. I will put in a plug that again, it's so easy to say the media and there's no possible way of knowing truth. Just a caveat. One, there's a lot of really still solid journalists doing the Lord's work, doing the best they can and working in their professional standards, and they should be recognized and lifted up and protected. The idea that they are under threat in the United States of America, where you do have intellectual freedom and free speech and free press, they should be protected. So we should seek out those sources more and more. But we also need to be very cognizant of the fact that we need to constantly be vigilant, absolutely vigilant, and seek out facts. And facts do matter. Um, it's so easy to lean into our confirmation bias and say, I already know what I believe to be true, so I'm going to cherry pick that information because every technology out there right now outside the library really reinforces that ability to just seek out what makes us think that we're already correct because we know we're correct.
Yep.
So I don't know what in a nutshell, long story short, seeking out actual facts matters because that's critical thinking. And that's what if anyone's listening and they're like, but what this doesn't matter to me. Yeah, it does matter because if you're just here for your career and the chance to make a lot of money, cool. You're going to still need critical thinking skills, and critical thinking skills go hand in hand with information literacy. You cannot have one without the other. And critical thinking means you make rendered judgments using logic. Um, and the evidence has to be the best evidence you can get your hands on, or depending on what you're looking for, but um, to make those decisions. So employers care that you're a critical thinker. Employers care that you're information literate. And even if they don't, your friends and family care that you're information literate and you make good choices, because nobody lives in an all on their own. I almost said an island unto themselves while on an island.
Well, we're here in the most remote place on the planet here on the beautiful island of Hawaii. Well, Sabrina, I want to turn our conversation to AI. Dun dun dun. Okay. So we know that AI tools like ChatGPT are increasingly being used in the world of research and education. Let's talk about your perspective on the value of those tools, the accuracy of those tools, the utility of those tools, coming from somebody whose career is built around accessing information and validating information. And, what's your point of view about AI's position now in the market?
So, what's important to recognize is that AI, particularly generative AI, has fundamentally changed. It's not just a Web 2.0 moment or a now we have smartphones moment. It's akin to we have the internet now moment. So there's that. And anyone who's like, "Oh, this isn't going to affect me," it will eventually affect you, and it's important to recognize that. As far as librarianship goes, not to toot our own horns, but we predicted this. We predicted this earlier, the 2016. That's why I talk about the information ecosystem. That comes directly from information professionals saying, guys, 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 it's going to get a whole lot different with AI within a very short amount of time. And we're going to need to change how we teach information literacy. And immediately they talked about AI literacy. So that's okay. How do you know what AI tool to use? How do you know how to use that ethically, when and how to use it? And most people would say, well, I need it, so I'm going to use it. There's no question. Well, then you run into academic integrity. So that's ethics number one. What happens when there's so many things you can do with generative AI right now. You can put in your entire math question and it's going to come and spit out the answer to you. Now, you could just copy that and put it into your assignment, or what you could do is then ask it to explain it step by step. Do you see the difference there? So it's not just so it's which AI to use, how to use it ethically. There's also, we really need to have a conversation about the energy behind using AI. It is real bad for the environment and the amount of energy and water that these huge machines are using. And again, you're like, I'm going to need to fact check that. You should. Absolutely. Look into the amount of energy it is taking to run each of these different AI tools, because
There's your homework assignment, listeners. There's your
right.
there's fact to validate is all the stories we hear about the enormous amount of energy needed, as we're already trying to transition over to renewables. This adds a level of complexity and a demand that didn't exist before. What about, when you think about the limitations of AI in comparison to a librarian, for example? What are those limitations? How can what you can offer as an information resource through a library, through digital resources, what are the limitations of AI that you can get past through the human element that you bring to the equation?
So to put a larger scope on this, librarians don't necessarily just spit out an answer. We used to back in the day. You would come and you'd be like, "Oh, what's the capital of Kansas?" And we're like, Topeka. And here's how you know that. Here's the printed book where you know that. Now, really what it is we teach learning strategies on how to do using credible sources, how to cite those sources, how to utilize them, how to use them ethically, all of that. Even when it's, I need 3 sources for this essay, it's an education opportunity every single time. So this information literacy, critical thinking, that's what we're doing day in, day out of the library. And when you have something called a research consultation, The research consultation is where a student and sometimes faculty will come in and they meet with us one-on-one. And it can be like we're meeting over Zoom or over Teams, or it can be in person. And we walk through the research process with you. And so often students come in with one question that they think they want the answer to and one research topic, but through something called where we basically interview them. We get to know what is it they're really after? What are the real questions behind the questions? And that conversation that really leads into understanding the core of what the student needs. And then we teach them how to go about doing that, how to go about finding those resources. Then we tell them, this is how you cite them. We can do as many research consultations as possible. That's free, by the way, as long as you're an HPU student, faculty, or staff. That's totally free, and it's confidential. Here's the kicker, and this is happening. Um, People understand that their information is being harvested and sold, and then they suddenly get pop-up ads on something that they don't want necessarily anyone to know. But we're like, oh, you do it incognito. And I'm like, cool. You think that that's really incognito? It's adorable. I always ask like people will talk about DuckDuckGo, and I'm like, who holds DuckDuckGo accountable?
Yeah.
What's that government agency? It doesn't
Yeah.
exist. There's no federal oversight. There is no accountability. That's gonna be. I wish I had $1 for every time I said that. Then
Yeah.
anyway,
You called out earlier, the need for more oversight or regulation. And, it's hard to imagine that that's forthcoming. If you look at historical trends in politics, Republicans tend to want to eliminate some regulatory hurdles that make it harder for businesses to do what they need to do. So it doesn't seem like, at least in the next few years, we're going to get much relief in terms of legislation or regulatory oversight.
no. So what students could do when they come in to see one of the librarians or they make a meeting to see one of the librarians is we can conduct those searches on for them. We can help whittle it down. And also, our databases are closed, those subscription databases. So that to my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, and I've been looking, I don't see them talking to anyone else. So that's not like they're harvesting your information. And much to actually the chagrin of students, because students will be like, I did this search and I want these sources again. And I'm like, you're going to have to recreate that search unless you save it, create an account and save your search results. They are not saved. So what that means is, so it's free, it's confidential. You have a research specialist who then goes in and whittles down and shows you how to save time, money, energy with your searches. And we keep everything confidential. So we're not going to tell your professor, oh, so and so came in and they were so lost. We don't do that. We never break confidentiality unless you are going to hurt yourself or others. Everything stays with us. And that's comforting. That's
It is.
something that ChatGPT harvests every single thing you put in it, everything down to your IP address. It is harvesting all of that information.
What is it doing? People I think have heard that, but I don't think everybody understands what does that mean exactly. Does that mean it's storing that information for reference for future questions that you ask? Does that mean that everybody who's asking ChatGPT questions now has your information as a potential information source? What does
I
that mean?
I can't again, I don't think that there's a lot of transparency in how it is being used. Have a strong suspicion. So that's my disclaimer. This is just my strong suspicion that it's being used to train and learn, right? It learns from what it is harvested, but that again, surveillance capitalism. If every Google search is bought and sold and commodified, and then who knows? But I think if you look at psychoanalytics and marketing, your searches, where you're searching, the terms you use, what you click on, how long you're on that site, that is a gold mine for developing exactly what your likes are, your preferences, when you're susceptible to new information. And that is powerful, powerful information for, I mean, not even nefarious actors, just people who want to just sell better.
Yeah.
And by the way, it is nice. It is incredibly nice that my phone will give me ads for the exact type of shoe that I want. And it's easy. It's so easy, even in the right price range. The trade-off is steep. And I just think that all of us need to understand and recognize the trade-off.
Yeah, I agree. And as a marketer who's taken advantage of the access to data and the ability to use that to drive, personalized communications, I appreciate the positive aspects, but I also see the negative aspects of how that affects people's perceptions of access to their information. So you've done a really good job for our listeners explaining, I think, the values and the differences in your ability to be an online resource for reference materials and truthful information and multiple sources, as compared to just trusting what ChatGPT tells you and not knowing its sources always, or our citations often, and the things it comes back with, but they're not always legitimate or valid sources, right? Go ahead.
Oh, I can't believe I forgot to say this. So, because I can't wait from, again, my peers would be like, hey, you forgot something. ChatGPT has what are referred to as hallucinations. So it will create not just inaccurate information, it will cite sources that don't exist. Will not you it'll say it's cited as scholarly source. You'll go and that source either does not exist, or it is taken out of context, or it's just not applicable. All of that is something that you need to bear in mind. It speaks in an authoritative tone. If you use ChatGPT, you'll notice that it tends to be kind and very authoritative, kind of like you're talking to a friendly professor. Here's the thing, it's not always correct. And when you're looks at it and you think, oh, well, it's credible, right? No,
Yep.
not necessarily. Also, just as a big question, who's going to fact check it? And how do we get out that it is inaccurate information? And what does it mean fundamentally that we are outsourcing reality and truth to whoever is behind this technology? Because it will be very easy to manipulate.
Yep. Yeah, just ask those attorneys that used AI to write some of their briefs and content and cited fictitious case law that ChatGPT just made up.
Right.
Yeah, no truth to it at all.
In fairness, it was caught. And I just want to take a moment to breathe and smile because it was caught. If that wasn't caught, then we would be further down the rabbit hole of uh-oh
Yeah.
than if it had not been.
Well, with some of the fraud prevention tools that are available for academics, for example, to validate online resources and its contribution to student papers and things, there's more of an ability to at least identify information that is sourced and not accurate than I think people realize. But it takes a professional such as yourself or professors that do this for a living to really know effectively how to do that. But as we hit the last few minutes of our conversation, I want to bring the conversation back to the physical space of a library. Again, acknowledging that in terms of online resources, boy, great place to go to get accurate information, help figuring out where are the sources. So all the wonderful things that reference librarians and resources can do for us. But you've talked a lot about libraries being what you call third spaces. And we see that the pressure to do things in the virtual world and online now is continuing to expand. So you've got a push-pull there. So I'm curious to ask what your future vision is for the physical spaces of libraries, and how do you see them evolving to remain relevant in a world where people want to, sit in their house and be on their phone or their computer to get everything.
Right. And you absolutely can. So it's a question of both. Why would you need brick and mortar buildings anymore for libraries? It's clear that the lion's share of our resources are virtual through paid subscriptions that are curated by professionals, negotiated by professionals, and maintained by the professional librarians. However, the space, the brick and mortar space, why is this needed? And that's because It's one of the very rare third spaces. And so that's a space where you can come in and you are welcome. We are excited you're here. You have a sense that you belong here. Nothing is expected of you. We do not expect you to pay for anything. We don't expect you to do anything, volunteer, nothing. You can just sit and be and exist. There were many more third spaces back not too long ago, but now most at this point are getting smaller and commodified, right? It's good to be able to make some money. Not only is this a third space where you can just be to relax and communicate and collaborate or quietly study by yourself, you also have access to librarians. And all you need to do is say, I need a research librarian, and watch them pop up and like, yes, how can I help you? There's just so much power to coming to a space where you are able to explore at your leisure, not just the online resources, but the in-person resources. We have displays, we have artwork, all of which is meant to help people engage in the resources that they don't necessarily see. So there's something like serendipity that happened all the time when you would go browse book by book by book in a bookstore or in a library. Here, many of our displays are organized to encourage that. And that's something that brick and mortar is important to. Also, clubs, helping clubs meet together and have a space for community. It's not just the clubs. We have special events that we like to do, de-stress events that we do every semester. We want the library and Learning Commons to be a hub of all of HPU. So everyone can come, everyone can build connection, and always feel welcome that this is a place for rest and recoup, but also a place where you can work when needed as well.
Yeah. So that's a great vision. It's a third space for you individually and a community engagement space for folks that want to get together and collaborate. So the moral of this story for our listeners is visit your local library. And if you're part of the HPU community, be sure to explore the incredible resources here at the HPU Library and Learning Commons. So Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your expertise. And for our listeners, can you advise them on if they want to learn more about the resources here at HPU or to get in touch with you, how might they do that?
Absolutely. I am every Monday through Friday. You can catch me in the library. We are in Building 6 on the 3rd floor. Just head right. I would love to talk with you. If you want to email me, I'm snthomas@hpu.edu. And I really look forward to hearing from people. If you would also like, you can check out our website and schedule a research consultation with one of our librarians to learn more about all of the free stuff that you have access to and how much money we can save you and time we can save you so that you don't have to do your research in a hole where you don't have any help, but you can actually reach out. We also have chat 24/7, so you have access to a research librarian who can assist you.
Perfect. Well, plenty of ways to get in touch. And you mentioned, saving our listeners from the embarrassment of conveying misinformation or liking misinformation is also a benefit. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in here. And we will catch you on our next episode of Hangin' at the Reef.
Thanks for having me.